You've probably heard the phrase that the only consistent thing in life is change, or words to that effect. And it's true, and it's part of the reason why change communication has become a much more sought after skill in recent times. And if there's one person who knows a thing or two about change communication and how our profession has evolved, it's Dr. Jen Frahm. Jen has spent 3 decades helping people make sense of change. She's a global expert in organisational change, transformation, and change communication, and she's known for translating complexity into action. She describes herself as equal parts truth teller, ambiguity tamer, and practical problem solver. Jen is the co-founder of the Agile Change Leadership Institute, where she has helped thousands of practitioners and leaders build the capability to lead through complex, continuously evolving environments. She's also the author of quite a few books, including Conversations of Change, Change Leader, the Agile Change Playbook, and she's just recently released her newest book, Change Communication. Now, originally an academic, Jen's doctoral research examined how change communication shapes change receptivity, and it's work that continues to underpin her thinking today. She has designed and delivered change across industries ranging from wine sales to wedding dresses, veterinary pharmaceuticals to energy utilities, and she's worked across government, corporate, and non-profit sectors across more than 80 countries. Now, in this conversation, Jen explains the difference between the different types of change communication, and we explore how that can relate to culture. She also shares her views on how the profession will continue to evolve, and she shares some top tips grounded in neuroscience that you do not want to miss. So without further ado, here's Jen. Jen Frahm, welcome to Less Chatter, More Matter.
Meloy, so pleased to be here.
I'm very excited to have you on the show. Bit of a fangirl, not going to lie. But before we kick off, can you tell our audience a little bit about you? Who are you? What do you do? How did you come to develop your expertise in this space?
Fabulous. Yeah, of course. So, I'm what, I guess I've got a couple of labels to who I am and what I do. One of them is I'm a comms lifer. And, in context of this conversation today, it means I've worked in communications pretty much since I was 19 through to now, my more mature years. And that has primarily been in the space of marketing and then change management. So I've got a PhD in change management. I've been an academic. I've been a change consultant. I've been a change manager. And I'm now the managing director of the Agile Change Leadership Institute, and we do online training for change managers and leaders in being adaptable and agile in our current organisational context. And most recently, I have published Change Communication, Less Noise, More Meaning, Change That Lands, a book which kind of captures my past, my present, and my thoughts on the future.
Love it. Now, you are a multi-author, but this latest book, which arrived in my PO box not long ago, tell me what inspired this one?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think where it came from was I noticed probably about 2 years ago, I felt like change communication was having a moment again. And what I mean by that was I recall 15 years ago, change communication was a discipline all of itself. So I did my PhD specifically on change communication. And I recall we were going through a phase where every project had a change communication advisor or a change communication specialist, and people were hired for that specialization. And then over the years, what seemed to happen was they were not being hired for change comms anymore. You would have a change and communication manager. And then even that dropped off. And so there was just this kind of inherent assumption that change managers would pick up the comms. But they actually
comms managers would pick up the change.
Yeah, right. But they had no background, no training, no discipline. And about 2 years ago, I saw that change comms was starting to own the space again. And we were having people that were at least being asked to take the role of change comms specifically, which, made me think, well, the timing is probably right to pull together everything that I know about this space and put it out there. And so I actually started with a masterclass in this. And I ran that for about 18 months before I wrote the book. So I was kind of testing all the material on the masterclass participants before it finally all came together into what you've got in front of you there.
Love it. And it's interesting you say that because, my first book came out 2 or 3 years ago. I feel like that's something I should know. But anyway, and it was about change communication. But it's interesting because I have found that most people who have bought it, I mean, there's a lot of comms people who have bought it, don't get me wrong, but a lot of change managers, because like you said, getting going, they're meant to do everything. They're meant to do all the change piece, the training piece, the comms piece. Like, apparently you are just a magician now and you can just go do it all.
And a lot of change people come into the discipline through things like engineering or more technical sides of the business. And so words aren't necessarily their strength, let alone, the philosophy or the theory behind communication. And so it can be a real deficit and a weakness for a lot of change practitioners.
And I think the flip side I see of that too is, I'm not sure whether you see it with the people you work with, but there seems to be this assumption, well, if you can do internal comms, you can do change. Or if you can do any kind of comms, you can do change comms. And in my mind, they are two different specialties. And I've worked in internal comms and worked in change and comms. They are two very different things. But the assumption is there, we'll just pull in this person from the internal comms team to come and support this project. And you're throwing them in the deep end too with that.
100%. And that's one of the very first things that I put in the book. So there's a level setting to explain what is the difference between internal comms, change communication, and marketing comms. Because I've also heard it's just all marketing, right? Change comms, we're just marketing the change to people. And certainly I've been on the receiving end of that instruction. So you're so right, Mel. Like there are overlaps and there are things that we can borrow and take from each other. But if we're not clear on what the distinctions are, we can make a real mess of it with what we're doing.
And you're just setting up the project to not fail, but just have a really hard slog to get everybody to where they need to be to make the thing happen.
Have a really rotten time as a practitioner as well. It's not fun being an internal comms person on a change project and not getting the outcome or the results because there's some elements that you're actually just not even aware of.
Yeah. So in the book, you talk about change comms having 3 very distinct roles. So monologic, dialogic, and sense making. Do I get those 3 right?
You absolutely did.
Yeah, there we go. So what do these mean? And how do we put them into practice? That's a big question, I know.
Yeah. No, it's a really useful question because I think it really is the foundation of what's in the book. And it was what came out of my PhD research. When I went into the research, being a practitioner in the field, at that point, change communication was all about tell people about the change, right? And that very much fits what we know as the monologic change communication model. So think monologue, think one person doing all the communicating. It is about information provision. We talk about it being instrumental. So your change communication is an instrument of the change. It is very much infused with power over. The change practitioner or the change comms practitioner or the leader who has all the knowledge has power over the people receiving the information. And so they get to decide what is communicated, when it's communicated, all of those kind of things. And that, by and large, is the dominant model of change communication in our organizational life, right? It's what we've all come through with. We saw with the advent of continuous change, once organizations started implementing multiple changes concurrently, we saw, and certainly when we looked at Sengi's work on the learning organization, this understanding of the importance of dialogue in navigating continuous change came through. And thus, we have what's known as dialogic change communication. And if we think about that concept of power, in dialogic change communication, power is shared. So we're working in this spirit of transparency and trust and respect, mutual respect. Me as a change practitioner, I don't necessarily have more knowledge than any of the audience, we see this in the conversations about co-creation, right? Co-creation in change is dialogic change communication, because we're coming together in dialogue to create more change. So it's very much about, the objective behind it is, do we want to create more change? That's when we use dialogue. And then third is this concept of sense making. And in every organization I have ever worked in every organization you have ever worked in, there's been this undercurrent of people talking about what the change is. And that might be gossip. It might be, it might be rumors. It might be the informal change champions who genuinely know what's going on and sharing it. The challenge for change practitioners is that in the past, that has been either weaponized or demonized, like, it's just gossip, don't worry about it. Whereas actually it's a really, really important barometer of how well the change is going. And if you are not making space for the sense making, which is essentially what's going on there, or you're looking for ways that you can put cues into the sense making that are helpful for people, then you actually lose control of the change completely. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that third type of change communication, which I call the background talk of change, is really about, again, the power becomes owned by the people, the recipients of the change. And they take control of whatever it is that you've put out there. Mm-hmm. Now, how that all comes together and why it's really important is that you can use those three models of change communication to sequence in a change project, right? You get started, you're not sure what you're going to be doing, great time for dialogue. You get more clarity on what you will be doing. Let's bring in the monologic change communication to provide stability for people. You want to make sure that it's being understood the right way. Let's create space for sense making. And so it's that sequencing of the three types. You think of yourself as the conductor of the orchestra, where you can make really sweet music of change communication.
Oh, I love it. So a couple of things on that. One is the monologic and dialogic. It feels like, and you're the researcher here, so correct this if I am wrong, but I'm making an assumption that you will find more or less of these in different cultures. So if you're working in a tight culture, the monologic, that direct tell and they will do kind of style, is going to be more prevalent, but the dialogic is going to be much more prevalent in the loose cultures, like the ones that we tend to work in, or more collectivist cultures. Would that be a safe assumption?
Definitely. So the way I looked at it in the research was around the importance of aligning the capability or the competency with the expectation. And whilst I didn't measure culture, I think broadly speaking, you're very correct. So when I did my research, I had two case studies. One was a highly unionized organization. So they had expectations of consultation. They had expectations of dialogue. And their initial leader was very big on that. And so they felt they had great change communication. The new leader that came in was very top down. I'll tell you what we're doing and, that's the way we're doing it. And all of a sudden, their measures of change communication started to drop, not because of what they were actually hearing, but we had moved from dialogic expectations to being met with monologic capability. Now, conversely, the other organization, the culture was very command and control. And the new leader came in who wanted to create a learning organization, who wanted to open up dialogue, who wanted to do co-creation of the organizational strategy. And we're talking many years ago now. Mm-hmm. And so that was completely misaligned. And they thought he was a terrible leader. They thought, he didn't know what he was doing. He kept asking us questions. And so it was that real misalignment between a capability and an expectation. And so I think organizations have distinct cultures which represent expectations of what does good communication look like in the organization. Am I told? Am I included? To what extent? All those things start to colour whether you think you've had good change communication or not.
Yeah. And it also brings me to, we do live in a much more uncertain world. And a lot of time when we're communicating change, the part of the head is uncertain. They haven't actually figured it all out yet. They just know that we have to do this change. They're not quite sure what the impacts are yet, all those sorts of things. And for some people in uncertainty, they really thrive more from having that monologic communication. Like, can you just tell me what we're doing? Just tell me what I'm doing and when I'm doing it, because I hate uncertainty and I just want clarity. And then you've got others who are like, well, I want to be part of helping to change this, to solve it. I want to I've got so many questions. And so that dialogic seems to come more into that space too. And it's about, well, how do you navigate both of those things when uncertainty is around us all the time now? It's not new.
And I think the tricky bit about this is the extent to which you're going to lean into learned helplessness. And what I mean by that, when you have an audience who just wants to be told what to do, right? They're not tolerating the uncertainty. They just want clarity. And only when I get clarity will I be able to do X, Y, Z. What you're actually doing by giving that clarity, even if it's in the moment, is you're supporting what's known as learned helplessness. You're not helping them build a capability and a resilience with continuous change. And it's just quite unrealistic that you will always be in a state, and it's completely unrealistic for leaders to be able to provide clarity in environments of high uncertainty. So it sets you up to fail with trying to do that. And so for me, the trick is around how do we include expectation management into our communicative activities. And that might be, if we're going to do a town hall or something of that nature where you're going to get up the front, you've got your leaders are going to say, hey, this is what is essentially a monologic forum, right? But the caveat is to say, today is Tuesday the 13th. Here's what we know. And you can provide that level of clarity for today only, recognizing, and part of your messaging is, here are the things that may change over the next couple of weeks or months or whatever the time zone is appropriate. So I think a lot of good change communication now is about expectation management. And it's as much about communicating the process of how we're going to go through change and what's coming up as it is telling people what is changing and how it's going to change.
Yeah, I love that. Expectation management. I think it's something we talk about it when we do our work with our clients around making sure you're talking about the messy middle, because a lot of the time the messaging's all sunshine and lollipops and rainbows, and this is going to be great. There's benefits. It's like, but people aren't stupid. And if you aren't setting up the expectation that there will be messiness, that there will be hard things, then it decreases your credibility as a leader or a communicator, whatever. But also it just gets people really frustrated because, again, they're not stupid. It could always come across as quite patronizing, I think, too, to say it's going to be all fantastic.
Absolutely. And look, that's a space that my practice has changed over the years with more knowledge around the neuroscience, because it's more than people aren't stupid. The neuroscience tells that people's brains seek threat before they seek reward. And this is a fact, or, a piece of science that's come from the neuroscience space that has really changed the way that I do change communication now. Because once upon a time, I might have communicated with, here are the benefits of this change up front to get people excited. However, what I know now is that if you're communicating benefits, they're not even listening to you because they're looking around and trying to read between the lines to go, what is the threat? What is the threat? What is the threat? And so now I actually lead with the threat and acknowledge the threats up front where it's appropriate to say, okay, some of you are concerned about this and we've heard this. So let's just have a chat about that and then lead to how the benefits will come in. Because unless you're actually talking about the threats first, people aren't in a neurologically safe space to listen to your benefit. So, it's not just the being patronizing, it's actually being brain friendly in your change comms.
I love that. And I think too, when we do our change comms planning, we oftentimes forget that reactance is a natural state as well. So it's going to happen. So plan for it. Talk to, as you say, address the elephant in the room. What are people likely to react over, and be upfront about it?
It's wonderful data. Right?
Yes, it's feedback.
Actually helps you with what you have to do more of, what you have to do less of, what's working, what's not. It's a gift.
Yeah. And I want to touch on the sense-making piece too, because I think the other thing that leads to that is a vacuum of information. So if people aren't getting the information that they need to make sense of it, then they fill the gaps, right? So that's where they put 2 and 2 together and come up with 25. And as you say, it's natural to expect that. And yet I do find, we sometimes come across leaders who get very upset about it. It's like, well, you haven't given them a reason not to come up with their own conclusions. Or it's great feedback because maybe it was the way you said something that triggered this negativity or chain of thought where they've gone down this rabbit hole. And that's important to understand that.
Amazing. Absolutely. And again, this has been a really interesting conversation over the years with leaders, to your point, because again, we're harping back on the neuroscience here. Our brain is a prediction machine. And if their evidence is not in front of the brain to make sense of what they're seeing, it will fill those gaps, fill that vacuum, right? To create cues into predicting what's going to happen. And the leaders often take that very, very personally, that, they see it as a personal failing, and they're being judged in terms of what they've done. Whereas actually it's an invitation again to shine a light on, hey, there might be a different way that you could communicate, or there's a different piece of information that's really important to people. And then if we put our empathy hat on, if we step into the shoes of our audience and the people that you're trying to influence, maybe we'd say something different, do something different around that. So I love that you brought that up. Yeah.
I think this neuroscience is so fascinating. Anybody working in any type of change or leadership role, you need to get amongst it. This is the way humans work, and we're working with humans, not robots. So get going.
I just think it, as a practitioner, it changes your practice.
Yes, fundamentally.
I have changed the way I work so significantly because of, the last 10 years of doing neuroscience studies and workshops and research and stuff like that. Huge difference in my personal practice.
Yeah, me too. So as part of the book, you did some research with real life practitioners. I'm one of the real life practitioners. What did you learn from that? Like, what is worrying people or what's exciting people?
Yeah, that was really interesting. Because the process, so I had 12 experts in change communication. You were one of those, and the other 11 were, I think we were across 8 countries. And primarily most of the people came from a very strong communication background. What I found the most interesting about what came out of that micro study or a Delphi panel was a focus on the profession and the occupation more so than the practices and tools of change communication. And what this meant was like a signaling of the importance of change communication moving upstream. And what I mean by that is the ability of people who've got strengths in change communication to be on the front foot of design of change, rather than on the receiving end of, here's your change, now go and communicate it.
Yeah.
So using all that knowledge around neuroscience, around dialogue, around sequencing and expectation management up front, so that you are actually being consulted and advising on what it's going to take for the change to land, as opposed to being the receiver of, here's the change coming down the pipeline, communicate it. So I think that was very interesting because it was framed up around the future of change communication. Yeah. So that was a very big finding that came out of it. There was a relative positivity about AI. And I perhaps might have expected there to be more negativity about AI for people in change communication. However, there was this sense of, as long as the guardrails are there, it's a positive thing for us. So I think that was good. And again, it was about how does the profession use judgment and wisdom more so than getting into a content creation environment. So I think that showed a real strong maturity in the space there. So there are a number of different things that came out of it, but I think they were the two things that really stood out for me. And the third was how much those findings were mimicking what's happening in the change management profession.
Yeah, right.
So in the change management space, we're having exactly the same conversations around how does change management end up upstream. Before you've even designed the change, you're actually talking with your change practitioners. How we're using AI in a way that's responsible is using our wisdom, that we're not becoming a content creation, kind of thing. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because earlier this week I was down in Sydney and working with a change team to really delve into what is our value proposition in a world that is increasingly, impacted by AI. But we also did some horizon scanning, looked at, what else is going on in their particular industry and what to expect in the next 3 to 5 years too. And, they raised a really good point around, they worked in an organisation where leaders value outputs. They want to see all the change documentation. They want to see the things, the artifacts. But the reality is that AI is going to be producing a lot more of that stuff. So how do you demonstrate the value that you bring when leaders see value as outputs? And in my mind, yes, okay, that's a shift that actually they're just going to have to, leaders are going to have to navigate themselves around where the value lies. But it's the human element that is so important, because no matter what your tool you use, no matter how you create your plan, the end user of that plan is still going to be a human being. And if people want connection, we are tribal people, we are social people, we want to feel valued, we want to feel listened to, we want to feel cared for. And an AI bot can't do that for somebody. An AI can't tell a leader, hey, this person over here is really upset. I think what you should be doing is blah, blah, blah. I feel like that's a world according to Mel anyway. That's where demonstrating value less through data points and more through those stories is going to be so important.
Well, I would, yes, and I actually think part of the answer is the data points, in the sense that change and communication practitioners have got to get a lot better at having these conversations with leaderships around what is important and how are we measuring it. There is value in having data points that you can lead a conversation with a leader, whether you're a change or a communication practitioner, about what is working. And being able to say, okay, you've asked for all of these artifacts. How has that shifted the dial? Vis-a-vis, we've done these workshops, we've gone and had these conversations, we've done this, and it shifted the dial this way. And perhaps this was also flagged in the Delphi study, the importance of having the business acumen and the ability to have conversations about data. Because in my experience, it's the one area that change practitioners are probably lacking the most in. And there is a craving for it from the leaders. When they see that you have commercial acumen, you become their trusted partner. And so without the ability to have that conversation and have the metrics that matter, then you're going to get stuck in this hamster wheel of, but they want this artifact, they want this artifact, they want this artifact.
Yeah. They want to see the pretty thing on the page. They want the dashboard. Yep. Every time. Now, I had 2 more formal questions for this part of the interview. The first one is, if somebody is listening to this episode and they are brand new to change communication, whether a change manager, a comms person, or a leader, a HR person, and they want to build that skill, where would they start?
I think I actually think they start with joining something like IABC, a professional network, because I think, yes, there's your book they could read, there's my book they could read. We have got peers who've got courses, all those kind of things. But there is so much value in shadowing and having conversations with experienced people in the field. And so professional associations become your go-to space of how do I meet the people in the field. We have podcasts on it, right? There's people get very hung up about what's the right course to do. And I'm such a big fan of informal learning, right? Or low-cost learning. There are books, there are podcasts, there are YouTube clips. There are all those kind of things. But I think until you're actually speaking with people who work in the space to say, so tell me what you've learned and where did you learn it and what was really important to you, that helps you navigate. And so that would be my first stop.
Love it. Yes. And I'm a big fan of everything you've just said. The podcasts, there's YouTube, there's events you can go to that you can learn from panels. Like it doesn't have to be, as you say, a formal course, although your Agile Lean Change course is available should anybody want to go partake. And last question for this part of our interview, with your book, Change Communication, who is it for? Why should somebody go buy it?
So the book has been written for change practitioners who feel uncomfortable with their performance in communication. It has been written for communication people who are being asked to step up and do change. It has been written for leaders who are frustrated with why is the change not benefiting from just do another communication, right? Above all else, it's been written for people in organisational life who are so curious about how can we make this change better. That's why they should read it. And I've deliberately structured it with the past being, here's where we've come from, because I believe that there is value in looking back. There are elements that we want to take with us. The present is the biggest part of the book because that's all the practices, that we want people to learn. And then the future is how do we actually get ready for where we're heading and recognizing that some people's future is right in front of their nose and other people's future is 10 years down the track.
So a really good point. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jen. I have 3 questions that I ask every guest on the podcast. Are you ready for those?
Oh, sure.
Let's do it. The first one is, what is an unexpected or left of field way that you learned a valuable lesson about communication?
It's a bad lesson. I mean, it's a good lesson, but no, it's a bad memory. So at one stage while I was a part-time student, full-time, I was one of those pesky mature age students.
I'm one of them.
I was working as a customer service agent for a flea and tick control manufacturer, pharmaceutical company. And I used to handle the 1-800 number. And I had this call where a woman was partially sobbing into the call because they'd used the product, the dog had died. It was paralysis tick for those, particularly in Queensland. And I responded with all my data in front of me, well, the product is 97% efficacious. And she replied, my dog is 100% dead.
Oh!
She noticed. And she's not wrong. That has one of the most uncomfortable left of field learnings for me around empathy and how you communicate with people. Yeah. So pleased I got to share that story again.
No.
Well, I appreciate you fronting up to it here. Second question, what is a book or a podcast you love and would recommend to our listeners?
Oh, easy. Switch, the Heath Brothers. When change is hard. It's I think it's probably getting close to 18 years old now, 20 years
Brilliant.
old. But it's a magnificent book. It features very heavily with applied positive psychology. One of the authors is a psychologist, one is a sociologist. There are so many great stories in it, and it has influenced my work incredibly.
I
Look
love
for the bright
books. Yes. There was a great story in there. I think it was around the bright spots of maybe somewhere in Southeast Asia, and they actually went to the local community and said, well,
Really,
how is
the children?
yes, how has this community done it? And just replicate what they've done because they've done it. Yeah. That was a brilliant book. Highly recommend as well. And last question, if you could wave your magic wand and change one thing about communication at work, what would it be?
Just one thing.
Yes, just one. From your
Just
top
one.
5.
That every time we go to send another communication, post another communication, upload another communication, we pause for 60 seconds and we ask ourselves, will this make the situation better?
Well, take a breath. Do that before you speak too.
Then before you move, the power of pause.
That's it. Yeah. Before you exist today, just take a breath. Well, Jen, it's been an absolute delight chatting to you. And if people want to find out more about you and your work, the Agile Leadership Institute, your books, what's the best place for them to go?
Look, I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. So I'm always very happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. And, you know, that then points you to various websites and ways to find all of the things that I have the immense joy to play in.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put links to your LinkedIn and your websites in our show notes as well. Jen, thank you again so much for joining us on Less Chatter, More Matter today.
A joy to be here with you. Thanks so much, Mel.
Thank you.